Hey, are you extra and do you like to bake? Well, let me present to you milling flour with our patented... We're not gonna do that. Look, it's 2019. We can mill our own darn flour. Now I know that the number one question here is gonna be, well, why mill your own flour? That's so, well, extra. And to that I ask you, well, why do anything? Why go through the process of making your own croissants? Link below, by the way. Why go through the effort of making your own bread from scratch when you can just go to a bakery and get it? Well, because you had everything to do with it, because it's something fun, it's something to practice. You ultimately created this product that you get to then enjoy. I mean, if you like to cook or bake, that's part of what it's all about. Nutritionally, it's way better. And then of course there's the flavor. And then like I just said, you get to control every aspect of it. So whether you're milling your own flour or not, this is information that will be useful to anyone that wants to bake their own bread. Now let's do this thing, shall we?
Okay, one more thing. I'm sorry. I know this is ending up longer than you want, but I just have to say this really quick, and I know I look terrible. It's 9:40 p.m. and I've got stuff to do and I gotta wake up at 4:30 in the morning, but I just wanna say a quick thank you because yesterday we hit over 100,000 subscribers, and I think that's a pretty big deal. And I just wanna give a quick humongous thank you to all of you and everyone who supports me. And I'm gonna talk more about this, but I just wanna get this out there and just let you guys know I'm super thankful and super grateful, and I plan on doing like some sort of celebration video, but for now, thank you. Okay, the video's continuing. I'm sorry.
Okay, so milling your own flour. Now, to your surprise, which may or may not be a surprise, in order to mill your own flour, you're going to need a mill. Now, I know this is a huge downer for a lot of you. I know you guys want to be like, well, what if I just throw it in a food processor or a blender? Don't do that. It's not going to work. You got to get a mill. If you're not interested in getting a mill, you should still check this video out. If you are interested in getting a mill, they're really not that expensive. And if this is something you're interested in, it's really a worthwhile expense in my opinion. I'll have a link below to the one that I have. This is a Nutrimill. It was actually gifted to me by my parents, but I was already planning on getting it pretty soon. I may look into getting a new one in the future, but I really like this one. I imagine as you go up in price, probably the better the quality of the grind, better flour equals empty pockets. Now, this is a really important factor here, and that is the type of wheat berries that you choose to use. There are lots and lots of types of wheat, so I'm not going to talk about every single kind, but I will talk about the main types that I like to work with. Now these types are going to be classified by 3 different things. First is whether it's hard or soft, then it's going to be the varietal, and then it's going to be the planting season. Now, I know that sounds a little bit confusing. So now typically hard wheat is going to have a higher protein content than soft wheat. So therefore, higher gluten content means it's going to lend way better to a loaf of bread just in general. Hence why bread flour is higher protein. So whereas soft wheat is going to lend itself to a lower protein and lower gluten content for things like cakes and cookies, not quite as good as bread. So in other words, we're looking for hard wheat because it's higher gluten, higher protein. Now the varietal that we're looking at today is going to be red wheat. I personally just like to work with red wheat because it has a nice flavor and color. And as for the planting season, there are a ton of variables that I honestly don't think are necessary to cover because it includes things like rainfall percentage, soil nutrition, local temperature. You get the point. I'm literally running out of breath saying this. Now let's just say my favorite choice for a loaf of bread is either hard red spring wheat or hard red winter wheat. Now, there's lots of places to buy it. I'll leave a link below on where I get some of mine. I'm also a huge fan of einkorn. Like ever since I started milling einkorn fresh, I have been completely blown away by the results in flavor and texture. And so yeah, I'll leave a link below for all these different grains, but those are the ones that I like to use. And of course, all of these are going to react differently on how you make bread. It's just a matter of testing it and seeing which one that you like the most. I can't really tell you which one's going to be your favorite, although I wish I could. Okay, so let's say that you got your grain, you got your mill, you're ready to go. Now, what about milling the flour, right? It's actually very straightforward, as you might have guessed. Turn the thing on, put the grains in, and it'll do the work for you. It's not rocket science, but there are a lot of crucial factors that come into play here. Now, I would say the most important are obviously grind consistency and temperature. Now, you might be thinking, wait, why temperature? I'll get to that in a second, but first let's talk about grind consistency. So when you're milling something, you're obviously going to want to choose a grind consistency that's going to give you the effect that you want. The finer the grind, then the finer the flour, the smaller the pieces of bran. With this mill, to be honest with you, I personally prefer to grind my flours to be as fine as possible with the smallest little flecks of bran as possible. In my experience, then it's just going to get a better rise and a better bloom in general. So yeah, long story short, I would start with doing fine flour. You can play with doing coarser flours later on. Okay, so temperature. Why is this important? Well, first off, if you're fermenting your dough and you're making sourdough, as I'm assuming that you are, then temperature is very, very important because your flour has so many microorganisms that you need in order to get that nice ferment, that nice bubbly rise, that nice big bloom. And there's a little bit of a hidden evil when it comes to grinding flour, and that is the fact the friction of the grind is going to cause some level of heat, which is okay, that's okay, don't worry. But just make sure to test your fresh ground flour with a temp probe to ensure that your grinder isn't, causing it to go above 110 degrees Fahrenheit or 43 degrees Celsius. Now, from what I've read, and I could be wrong, but it seems to be across the board, the natural yeast on the actual wheat tend to die off around 115 degrees Fahrenheit or 46 degrees Celsius, which in the case of sourdough isn't so good. Some people like to grind their grains on a really coarse setting first and then grind them again on a fine setting to avoid heating up the grains too much. I only do this if I'm milling a huge quantity of flour. Usually if I'm just doing, like 500 grams or so, it's totally fine. It's not going to overheat the flour, but just something to pay attention to. Some people also like to freeze their grains before they grind them. That way, as they're grinding it, even though it's warming up, it's starting from such a cold temperature that it never actually reaches an unsafe temperature for those lovely little yeasties that are our best friends that we need to take care of and, feed them every once in a while. Okay, so you've got your grain mill, you've got your grains, you even ground your grains, but what could possibly be left? And that is sifting. Now, once your flour is ground, you can even sift it through a fine mesh sifter to get out even more of that bran, which will not only result in a better rise, but a much different flavor profile and texture on both the inside and the crust. Now, this is also referred to as the extraction rate. Anytime you see high extraction flour, it's basically implying that it has a high percentage of bran and germ left behind. Now, I usually don't sift my fresh milled flour because I want the full effect of both the fermentation properties as well as the flavor in my bread. And by not sifting it, you can basically say that it's 100% extraction flour. So the finer your mesh sieve, the lower the extraction essentially. If you choose to sift it, then it will likely have a higher rise, lighter wheat flavor, and a slightly slower rate of fermentation, just a little bit. Long story short, sifting is optional and totally up to personal preference. All right, so you've got your milled flour. Now it's time to use it in your bread. So when baking bread with fresh milled flour, you need to be aware that it is likely not going to be as strong as commercially made bread flour. In fact, it's definitely not going to be. So I usually do anywhere between 20 to 50% fresh milled flour, and then the rest is essentially strong unbleached bread flour. If you're looking for a nice rise and a good bloom with moderately forward fresh milled flour flavor, wow, that was a tongue twister, then 20 to 30% is your number. Everything after the fact is really just a matter of testing what you like. And that is the true beauty of milling your own flour for bread making.
All right, guys, and that is it. Well, what do I say? You know how to mill your own flour. Well, okay, in all seriousness, I hope that this sheds some light on the producers that make this stuff and a little bit of understanding on what it takes to get from A to B. Getting from grain to a loaf of bread is just like this big long chain, and this is just one little piece of it. There's the growing of the wheat, then there's gonna be someone who's gotta transport it, then there's gonna be someone who's gotta properly grind it, then make sure it follows the FDA guidelines, and they have to pay for organic labels. You get the point. It just shows how much goes into everything that we get to eat. And that's my takeaway for today. So that was a little bit heavy. I'm sorry. But either way, if you enjoyed this video or you learned something, leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you next week, or probably later this week, because I got a baguette video coming, and I'm filming it tomorrow. And what else did I want to say? I want to say something else. Nope, yep, that's it.